Once I have everything pinned into place, the next step seems a little bit funny, but it works just great. I'm going to take a running stitch. I'm going to go around all of my letters with just a running stitch. Then I'm going to come back, I'm going to unpin, and I'm going to take a small scissors and I'm going to trim the plastic away from the exterior of my letters and out of the middle of the O. So I'll end up with just the letters J-O-Y in red Cuddle on here, but they'll still have the plastic on top of them. So we'll go over to the sewing machine now. We'll work through that whole process so you'll see everything, but that's what we're planning to do. Here we are at the machine. I always prep a piece of fabric to practice on. This is the scrap from the fat quarter and a little piece that was left over that had the stabilizer on the back. So this piece is set up just like my project. And I want to pick a stitch that's going to work well. I called up a regular zigzag stitch and I did a couple little tests over here. And you can see this one looks really nice. That one's a little bit weak, not filled in quite enough. So that should be just beautiful along the edge. So you can see my stitch width is at 3.0 and my length is at 0.2. This machine has the ability to save your stitch length. I can set it in memory and close it. And when I come back to my machine next time, I can have it stay at this length or I can reset it to the regular. I can save up to 5 different stitch widths and lengths in the memory of this machine. So this is one of my favorites. It's saved in my memory. If I came here at the start, I would just go to my pocket and I would say retrieve, and then I would pick my favorite one, which is right here. We're already on it. And we would just hit retrieve and close, and I'm ready to sew. So first thing I'm going to do is just go to my running stitch, because that's what we're going to go around first, around our letter Joy. And so I'm going to just run along the edge, and this is what I would be stitching right along the letter of the word joy. So when I take that out, you can see I just have a little running stitch right along the edge. I'm going to do that all the way around the word joy, and then I'm going to come back and I'm actually going to switch to a different foot. I want to just have my regular foot on. I have my blade on. You can use just any regular foot. Your basic stitching foot works just great for this. And it helps if you hit the zigzag stitch. Now I've changed to a zigzag, and I'm going to go right over. Don't sew over pins. Do as I say, not as I do. And this is going to go right over the running stitch. And I'm going to hit stop and raise my foot. And you can see just that section right here has the running stitch over it. I've still got red that's sticking out here. That'll be trimmed off later. But that's what we're going to be doing. So I always practice on a little piece first. I'm ready to start sewing my applique on right now. I've got everything prepped like we had previously. I have my machine set to a straight running stitch. That's the first thing we're going to do. Go around all the letters with a regular running stitch. I have my pivot my pivot function turned on. That means that every time I stop sewing, it will plant the needle and lift the foot, which is a real handy feature if you're an appliquer. It allows me to turn and pivot my project without having to pick up my hand to raise my pressure foot. So if you have a pivot function, this is a good time to use it. I've switched to my regular, just open toe foot. I took off my 1/4-inch blade. I just have an open-toed foot on, excuse me. So I'm going to snap this back on. I am using a walking foot. When I said use your regular foot, I meant not your 1/4-inch quilting foot. A regular, just open-toe foot on your walking foot. This is a Move It foot that comes with the Brother machines. If you're wondering, it's a little bit bigger than most walking feet, but it actually has a conveyor that rolls, keeps the project really steady and smooth. And that's also a reason I'm using the pivot foot, is that conveyor needs to raise and lower as I'm turning, because its purpose is to keep everything smooth and straight. So I'm going to start with the Y. And the reason for that is when you're looking at a project, your eye always goes top left to bottom right, like you're reading a book. So if I start with my J and it's not great, that's the first thing people are going to see. So I'm going to start at my Y, kind of the bottom end over here. And that way, if it's not the best stitching, it's less noticeable than if I start elsewhere. And I'm going to do the O last because that takes the curve all the way around. And that's the trickiest part, is doing that curve smoothly. So I'm going to go ahead and just start here. And I'm just looking to see, hopefully my arm's not in your way as I sew. And I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to plant my needle. Again, I'm set on just a regular running stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and sew. When I stop, the needle is down, the foot raises up. I pivot my project, keep sewing along. One more stitch there, raise that up. I'm going to just cut this little thread tail out of the way so I don't sew it down, and keep going around my Y. I want to stop and pivot so that those points are nice and sharp. I've got a little mark here inside my foot, that's where my needle goes down. I'm lining that mark up with my Sharpie marker line. So I'm getting it nice and straight. Go out to the point. It'll raise, I pivot. I love that pivot function when I'm doing applique. You can do it manually if you don't have that function. Here I'm a little far over. I'm going to go back and do one more stitch. And I can just use my needle up and down for that. And then it's right where I want it to be. Remember when we were tracing our word joy? One more stitch there. When we were tracing the word joy, I said I would normally use the fine Sharpie marker rather than the thick black, but I wanted you to be able to see this. That fine line makes it a little bit easier to see. I'm continuing to sew with my running stitch, going slowly around the curves. I can stop and pivot as I go. Again, with the running stitch, it's fairly smooth and easy to go around curves. Just stop and pivot. Don't think you have to just move your fabric. Again, one more stitch. And I'm going to keep sewing, and I will come back to you when I've got this all done. Remember, when you're doing the O, you have to go around the outside of the letter as well as the inside. So we're completely sewn around the running stitch of our word joy. The next step is we're going to unpin and then trim away the cuddle and the rest of the topper, leaving the topper, the plastic, on top of the letters. So the easiest way to do this that I've found is by using my favorite little, it's probably not the right name, but I call it the snippy scissors. I don't have to put my fingers in the holes. I just squeeze, and it has a curved blade. The blade curves up. When I cut, I'm not cutting with the tip. I'm cutting with the curve portion of the blade against my running stitch. So I'm going to come back here and snip through. And when I get close to that letter, I'm using, again, the middle of my scissors to clip right along that edge. It's easier to lay it on a surface. I'm not cutting through my background fabric. I'm just cutting out the heated topper and the cuddle. And I hope this is close enough that you can see, but I'm going to work just all the way around and leaving that plastic on the top edge. So I'm right at the stitch line. The more that I get trimmed away, the closer my trim is, without cutting my running stitch, the better my satin stitch will be. The purpose of leaving the plastic on and cutting right along this edge is we're going to do a satin stitch around everything. This is holding down the cuddle so that the fuzzes don't come out of the side of your satin stitching. So it makes a really nice clean cut. So I'm going to just keep cutting, and I'm going to double check that I didn't snip through. I'm going to keep cutting, and I'll be back in a few minutes when it's done. I have my Y done. You'll see right here I snipped my stitch a little bit, so it's a little loose in that spot. When I go to sew that, I'm going to just sort of hold that in place. And I'm going to keep cutting and not go quite as fast so I don't snip my stitches anywhere else. When I go to cut out the center of the O, I need to poke through and cut this, but I have to be sure when I cut through the cuddle that I don't also cut through the back fabric. So I'm kind of reaching, I'm grabbing a section here out of the middle of the O so that when I poke my finger through, I can get my scissors in to cut out the cuddle but not hit the background fabric. So that gives me a place to start. And you can see I'm not cutting through my background fabric. I haven't quite cut through the layer of interfacing that's there. So I just picked that up. And now I can see my letters of my home coming through. And I can cut right out to the edge. And again, now I'm going to cut all the way around that inner circle, not cutting my stitching line. Once I have everything cut out, I'm just going to use my lint roller again to pick up any last minute fuzz that might be there. We don't want to sew that into our stitch line. Now we're going to head back to the sewing machine and we're going to do a satin stitch around all the letters. Again, the reason that the heat topper is on here is so that it keeps the cuddle under control and it doesn't come out between your stitches.